A bunch of infamous motorcyclists believed they had discovered an easy target in a modest café in downtown Seattle, a homeless veteran sipping his morning coffee in silence. Unaware that they had just engaged in combat with one of the most dangerous individuals in the Pacific Northwest, a decorated Special Forces captain with more than 20 years of combat experience, they taunted him, shoved him, and threatened him while he lived on the streets in anonymity. However, this isn't your typical revenge tale. It's about second chances, atonement, and how a single moment of poor decision-making united a fractured society. In addition to altering the lives of those haughty motorcyclists, what transpired in that café would also alter how the city as a whole views its forgotten heroes. Let's have a little rest. Please let us know where you are tuning in. Remember to subscribe if you enjoy this type of content, since tomorrow's story will be something very exceptional. Michael James Morgan was slumped over his coffee cup in Spencer's Corner Diner, the morning sun barely breaking through the dense fog pouring in from Puget Sound. Scarred from innumerable conflicts, his grizzled hands encircled the warm ceramic mug as if it were his final source of solace. Slowly, the diner's usual morning population began to arrive, including truck drivers beginning their long hauls, dock workers finishing their night shifts, and businesspeople grabbing quick breakfasts. As she cleaned the counter for the 100th time that morning, Laura Spencer's gaze kept straying to James's booth in the corner. Since discovering him dozing off in the alley behind her cafe a year prior, she had been providing him with breakfast. The way he sat, the way he looked around the room, the military accuracy with which he folded his napkin, everything about him was unusual. 5 motorbikes rushed down the street, their motors drowning out all other sounds, shattering the peaceful morning routine. In the dim morning light, the bike's chrome gleamed as they pulled up to the curb. Their captain, James "Iron" Thompson, dismounted first, approaching the diner's entrance with his huge bulk obstructing the window's light. Laura gripped her cleaning cloth more tightly. Although they had been causing havoc throughout downtown, the Red Wolves had never previously entered her diner. Iron bowed his head and went in as the bell above the door chimed, followed by his team, which included Derek "Coyote" Brooks, Steve "Chaos" Miller, Rick "Rage" Wilson, and Kevin "Venom" Martinez. After examining every inch of the diner, Iron's gaze finally settled on James. As he pushed Venom and pointed out the apparently defenseless target in the corner, a ruthless grin appeared on his face. Heads down and avoiding eye contact, the other customers suddenly showed a great deal of interest in their food. James's posture changed slightly, but he didn't look up from his coffee. These soldiers were broadcasting disaster with every move, and his 20 years of battle expertise had trained him to spot threat patterns. As the motorcyclists dispersed throughout the cafe, he continued to count the number of footfall in his indifferent stance. Iron's voice roared across the silent room, well, what's in here? Another useless veterinarian occupying space in my community?" Laura took a step forward, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "Everyone is welcome in my diner as long as they act appropriately." Iron's chuckle was akin to blending gravel. "Who's your diner?" "That's adorable, my love, but the Red Wolves now own everything in this neighborhood." Unnoticeably, James's fingers clenched around his cup. Beneath his old jacket, the familiar weight of his dog tags pressed against his chest, a reminder of who he was and still was in spite of appearances. The group's youngest member, Rage, strode over to James's booth. "Old-timer, hello. Nice jacket. Army surplus?" Attempting to act like a soldier. There was utter silence in the diner. It appeared as though everyone was holding their breath, even the sizzling of bacon on the grill. The young motorcyclist took an unintentional step backwards as James steadily looked up from his coffee and met Rage's stare. "Marines." Despite being quiet, James's words could be heard well across the quiet diner. "You wouldn't be able to tell the difference." With his boots heavy on the linoleum floor, Iron marched toward the booth, his expression darkening. "Old man, do you have anything to say?" "I say you're taking up precious space, and what I say is what goes around here." James carefully placed his coffee cup down. He moved with economy and precision, wasting nothing and not hurrying. Although none of the bikers realized it, it was the kind of efficiency that only comes from years of training. James said evenly, "I'm paying for the only space I'm taking." "How much am I supposed to pay you for the coffee, Laura?" Iron's palm flew out, knocking the coffee cup off the table before Laura could respond. It broke on the floor, a dark liquid smearing like a stain on the old tiles. Several diners jumped as the crash reverberated throughout the establishment. "Looks like you're all done here," Iron sneered. "Oops." James glanced at the shattered cup, then at the coffee that was spilling, and then up at Iron. Moments before, his eyes had been weary and despondent, but now they were focused and keen. It was like seeing storm clouds form on a bright day, subtle but profound. The other motorcyclists approached, around the booth in a loose circle. They were accustomed to dominating, threatening, and intimidating others. They couldn't explain why, but there was something unsettling about James's silence. Laura's hand was already moving for the phone behind the counter as she watched the drama play out. She was memorized with Officer Bradley's number. Months before, he had warned her about the Red Dragon's increasing influence in the area. "Do you know what I believe?" Iron went forward, lowering himself to confront James. "You're simply another broken-down veteran who couldn't survive in the real world, in my opinion. Wearing a beat-up jacket and acting tough, you most likely have a depressing story about PTSD or something. Guess what, though? We don't like your kind here, and this is now our turf." The fog had started to clear through the diner's windows, and the scene was illuminated by the morning sun. James stayed sat, his body relaxed but attentive, years of combat expertise and training concealed behind a meticulously preserved facade of defeat. James had spent too many years submitting to bullies who didn't know who they were truly dealing with, and the next few moments would decide whether this situation ended in violence or submission. Iron's enormous hand curled its fingers into the tattered material of the ancient military jacket as it grabbed for James's collar. Expecting the customary terror and obedience from his victims, the biker's face was contorted into a sneer. But as he tightened his hold, the atmosphere in the tiny diner altered. James's quickness belied his outward age and state of health. The larger man's eyes widened in astonishment as his hand went up and grabbed Iron's wrist. No one in the diner had suspected the accuracy and precision of the movement, which spoke of years of training. James's voice was soft, but it had a steely edge that caused some of the bikers to move uneasily. "Take your hand off me while it's still possible." Iron attempted to yank his arm back, but James's hold was unbreakable. The biker's expression briefly changed from one of bewilderment to one of rage. He was unaccustomed to opposition, particularly from someone with James's weak appearance. Iron barked like a venom coyote. "Demonstrate to this elderly man the consequences of disrespect." The two bikers advanced, but James's demonstration of strength caused them to lose their customary self-assurance. An easy target, a broken-down veteran they could use for amusement, was what they had anticipated. Instead, they discovered something very different. Laura's voice broke the tense silence. "I'll call the police if you don't stop this now." James moved carefully and deliberately as he released Iron's wrist. He was reminded of another encounter that had happened years earlier in a different location. In Kandahar, he had led his Special Forces unit through a hostage scenario while serving as Captain Michael Morgan. The same serenity and purposefulness had descended upon him at that time. James looked at each biker in turn and stated, "You don't want this fight. Believe me." Young and ready to show himself, Rage rushed forward abruptly. Rage found himself stretched across a barren table, dishes and cutlery clattering to the floor, even though James didn't appear to stir. More than agony, shock was visible on the young biker's face. James's voice was steady as he said, "I told you. This fight is not what you want." Anger had darkened Iron's face. No one opposed the Red Wolves, particularly not within their own borders. Several diners screamed in anticipation of a weapon as he reached behind his back. However, a fresh voice entered the conflict before he could finish the movement. "Laura, is everything well in here?" With his clothes clean and his hand resting casually on his belt, Officer Tom Bradley stood in the doorway. He looked at the sight, the coffee that had been spilled. Tension was in the air as rage spread out across the table. Iron's face contorted into a fake smile as his hand slowly slid away from his back. "Just talking to the local wildlife officer in a nice manner." As Bradley glanced at James, his eyes narrowed and his face flashed with realization. Throughout the neighborhood, he had noticed the veteran, who was always reserved and silent. However, there was a hint of military training about James's posture today. As Bradley entered the diner, he noticed a humorous conversation that ended with shattered dishes and irate patrons. The spectacle was being watched by the other customers with a mix of fascination and terror. The majority of them were ordinary people with jobs who simply wanted to eat breakfast in peace. Now, however, none of them had anticipated what they were witnessing. Laura walked purposefully around the counter, coffee pot in hand. "Like everyone else, James is a customer here. He's not looking for problems." James stayed in his chair, comfortable but prepared. He was able to analyze circumstances and predict movements before they happened thanks to his 20 years of fighting experience. He saw how Bradley was setting himself up for possible problems, the indecision on the faces of the younger bikers, and the increasing rage in Iron's eyes. Iron said in a threat-laden voice, "Perhaps we should take this outside. Have an honest discussion about territory and respect." Bradley retorted, "Or perhaps you gentlemen could complete your business somewhere else, prior to this becoming a formal police matter." Coyote and Chaos looked at one another, their former bluster fading in the face of possible legal issues. They had probation officers who would not approve of a brawl in a public setting, and they had records. Iron, however, was not going to back down. Now his reputation depended on it. He had gone too far to just turn and leave, especially with his staff watching. James saw that Tell Iron was preparing himself for combat regardless of the repercussions as his fingers tensed at his sides. Iron snarled, staring at James, "This isn't over." "By no means." James steadily looked into his eyes. "It might be. We'll call it even if you leave now." The quiet assurance behind the remarks, in addition to their content, gave them weight. Some diners in the café sat up straight, picking up on something in James's speech that they had not previously picked up on. Iron intentionally showed disdain by spatting on the floor. "Old man, do you think you're unique? Just another broken-down veteran who couldn't survive in the real world, you're nothing." The remark lingered in the air with a sense of dread, but James remained silent. In locations that most people couldn't locate on a map, he had encountered more dangerous threats. Rather, he rose slowly, his steps smooth and deliberate. The bikers appeared to notice something strange about him for the first time. There was an unmistakable core of steel in his bearing, despite his tattered appearance and old clothing. It was evident in his posture, his fluid motions, and the calm assessment in his eyes. "Last chance," James said. "Leave." Now that the fog had completely dissipated, the morning sun was shining through the diner's windows and creating long shadows on the floor. The situation was precarious under the glaring light. Everyone in the diner could sense the violence that hovered in the air like a storm poised to blow. With explosive power, Iron pushed past Officer Bradley and sprang at James, delivering a haymaker that would have rendered most men unconscious. James, however, wasn't like other males. Decades of training took over as he subtly shifted his head to deliver the hit. The large motorcyclist's momentum propelled him forward, and into James's well-timed counterattack. James's attack was economical, precise, and devoid of ostentatious moves or methods. He struck Iron's solar plexus with his fist, forcing the breath out of the larger man's lungs. Iron's face registered shock rather than agony as he staggered. James managed to hold the motorcyclist with little difficulty by twisting his arm behind his back before anyone could respond. "That's sufficient." With his hand on his holster, Bradley took a step forward. Get down, everyone. Coyote and Venom began to go forward, but James's soft voice interrupted them. 3 seconds remain before your friend's shoulder dislocates. You have an option. The other motorcyclists froze, unsure. They had never witnessed anyone, let alone a purportedly homeless veteran, treat Iron in such a manner. Iron's face was flushed with humiliation and anger, but he was unable to escape James's hold. Laura covered her mouth with her palm as she observed from behind the counter. Other customers had gotten up from their chairs and were filming the scene with their phones. A crowd had begun to form through the window, attracted by the noise. An elderly man at the desk rose slowly, a knowing smile spreading across his wrinkled face. Derek Johnson adjusted his own veteran's cap and said, "Damn, James. I see you still have that Special Forces touch." Derek's statements caused the room to become silent. The Special Forces. As the consequences dawned on the riders, their faces transformed. It wasn't just any homeless veteran they were addressing. James stepped back to create distance and gently pushed Iron away. "You don't want this fight, as I mentioned." Iron rubbed his shoulder and straightened up, his face a mask of shame and rage. "Old man, you're dead. Do you hear me? Dead." Bradley, however, moved in between them. "He isn't. Because I'll know exactly where to search first if something were to happen to him. Now leave my sight and take your gang." Venom took Iron's arm and spoke in a low, anxious voice. "Let's go, boss. You're not worth it." Iron retreated toward the door while shrugging from Venom's hand, his gaze never leaving James. "It's not over yet. No one makes the Red Wolves seem bad." With cautious steps in place of their previous swagger, the bikers retreated from the diner. The street was filled with the sound of motors roaring to life as they mounted their bikes. They vanished into the early traffic in a matter of seconds. Bradley turned to face James, his face displaying a mix of concern and admiration. "Captain, would you mind telling me what that was all about?" James's eyes grew a little narrower. "How did you?" Bradley said, "I was Army too. Those maneuvers, those commands, those Special Forces exercises. Back in 2008, I participated in some combined operations with your soldiers in Afghanistan." Laura came over with a brand new cup of coffee, setting it down with trembling hands. "Why never did you say anything, James?" "Because I've changed who I am." The adrenaline had worn off from James's voice. "I haven't been in a while." Derek pulled up a chair and stepped forward. "Brother, that's not how it works. A warrior is a warrior forever. Even though some people are no longer able to view it." The other customers were going back to their seats, but they were acting differently. They observed something different from the homeless man they had previously seen. Another person. Whispers began, phones emerged, and messages were conveyed. "You're aware that they'll return," Bradley said. "Grudges are difficult for the Red Wolves to forgive." James took a drink of his freshly brewed coffee and nodded. "I am aware. In any case, perhaps it's time for someone to confront them. There has been enough bullying in this area." Laura's face was worried as she leaned against the counter. "However, how did someone like you become homeless, and why are you?" "For her," James completed. His expression relaxed a bit. "It's a lengthy tale. All too many veterans have it." Derek gave a somber nod. "VAs are overworked and systems are faulty. There are far too many decent men and women who are overlooked. I've been attempting to establish a local support center. However, City Hall is taking too long." Bradley took his notebook out. "Let me show you my card first, then I'll submit a report on this. You too." He gave Derek and James cards. "Call me day or night if those bikers return or if anything else comes up." The late morning throng, attracted by the story of what had transpired, was beginning to fill the diner. James could hear their hushed chatter and sense their eyes on him. His meticulously preserved anonymity was now gone. Derek advised you to see the VA. In an effort to assist veterans in getting back on their feet, Dr. Bennett has been managing a new initiative. Perhaps we could. Thank you, James interrupted. However, I'm not seeking alms. Laura spoke firmly. James, it's what you earned, not charity. What you are due. Now that the morning light was fully up, it was pouring through the windows and creating long shadows on the floor of the diner. James gazed at his reflection in the window, the weary eyes, the graying beard, and the shabby clothes. He could still see remnants of the man he once was beneath it all. He may be the same man again. Tell us where you're tuning in from before we resume. Make sure to subscribe if this tale resonates with you, as I have something really special in store for you tomorrow. A police cruiser slid by outside, watching for bikers who could be coming back. James, however, was aware that this was only the start. This humiliation would not be tolerated by the Red Wolves. Better yet, the neighborhood's issues wouldn't be resolved on their own. Perhaps it was time to come out of hiding. It's time to transcend being another overlooked veteran. As Iron strode back and forth, his heavy boots creating a path in the wooden floor, the Red Wolves clubhouse hummed with anxiety. The tables were strewn with empty bottles. Evidence of hours spent using booze to heal bruised pride. Shadows flickered over the walls adorned with gang insignias and motorbike accessories as the afternoon sun crept through dirty windows. He gave us a weak appearance. The bottles jumped as Iron's fist slammed into the bar. We are not subjected to that. No one. From the corner, Venom observed his leader with an ice pack pushed against his wounded ribs, a memento of their hurried escape. The other members sat strewn about the room, their customary bluster tempered by what had happened that morning. Anger said, perhaps we should consider this, drawing a homicidal stare from Iron. Was that a Special Forces? Iron spat, after all, if he truly is Special Forces? He's nothing but trash. Now. We will remind him of that as well. Max was standing at the Seattle VA Medical Center's entrance across town, and he could hardly identify the man reflected in the glass doors. Derek, who saw the gravity of the situation, waited calmly next to him. Good people, Dr. Bennett, Derek muttered. She is aware that there is no pressure or condemnation. The hospital was bustling with activity. The waiting rooms were packed with veterans of all ages, some with obvious wounds and others with invisible ones. The metal felt warm against Max's skin as his fingers automatically located his dog tags under his jacket. Although Dr. Emily Bennett appeared younger than Mac had anticipated, there was wisdom in her eyes from having witnessed the effects of war firsthand. She had pictures of happy veterans on the walls of her cozy, inviting office. Mac assumed they were success stories. She pointed to a chair and said, Captain Morgan. I've heard a lot about you from Derek. He lowered himself into the seat and fixed it, it's just Mac now. It's been a while since I was Captain Morgan. The eyes of Dr. Bennett were professional but compassionate. Do you want to explain why? Max's eyes strayed to the window overlooking the skyline of Seattle. My team was lost in Kandahar. Poor intelligence, poor timing. I removed them, but... His recollections were still too vivid, and he trailed off. She ended for him, you came home different. There was no question. They claimed that PTSD prevented them from connecting and from sleeping. Wife made an effort to comprehend, but... He gave a shrug. It's not her fault that she left. Began drinking, lost everything, the job, the house, everything. Laura was back at Spencer's diner, cleaning tables and watching the street outside. More patrons than usual had arrived because of the morning's events, all excited to tell tales of the homeless veteran who had defeated the head of the Red Dragon. Officer Bradley was taking notes while sipping coffee at the counter. Iron told Laura that he had a record. Nothing stuck, including charges of assault, extortion, and weapons, but this time could be different. Laura knew it was true when she said, "Mac won't press charges. All he wants is solitude." Derek commented as he entered the diner, "Perhaps that's the issue. The reason we wound up on the streets in the first place is because too many of us want to be left alone." Dr. Bennett leaned forward in her chair at the VA. "What took place at the diner this morning? Self-defense wasn't the only reason, was it?" Mac's grip on the armrests became a little tighter. "We had to stop them. It has to be done by someone. And now. Right now." Mac gave a hollow laugh. "They will now come seeking retribution. Guys like that think that way. What do you think?" She pushed. "It's not that the man I've heard about, who has been discreetly assisting other homeless veterans in finding food and shelter, has quit up." As Mac took in what she had to say, the late afternoon sun created long shadows through her office window. He had made an effort to blend in with the city's surroundings and remain undetectable. Perhaps, however, that period was over. Iron's plans had taken a more sinister turn at the clubhouse. We strike him where the pain is. The eatery. His companions. Everything that matters to him. The chaos moved uneasily. "Perhaps we're going too far, boss." There was only one altercation. Iron's hand sprang out and grabbed Chaos' collar. "There is never a single battle. Respect is at issue. About power. Either you agree with me or you disagree with me." The other bikers remained mute as they observed the argument. The gap widening between those who support Iron's fury and those who start to doubt his judgment. The club was evolving and separating in ways that would soon be hard to overlook. As Laura spoke to Derek, her voice could be heard clearly throughout the diner. "That building on Pine Street is unoccupied. That one that was a community center once. What if?" Derek's eyes glowed with comprehension. "A center for the support of veterans? In the same neighborhood?" Bradley cautioned that the Red Wolves would not like that. They have been attempting to expand their authority over downtown. Derek said firmly, "Perhaps it's time someone pushed back the proper manner." Mac got up to leave the VA, but he was halted by Dr. Bennett's voice. "Fighting isn't the most difficult aspect of being a warrior, is it? It involves determining when to drop the blade and when to pick it back up." Mac stopped at the door and thought about what she had said. He no longer acted as though the guy he had become and the man he had been were so different. The events of the morning had demonstrated that. It was getting late in the evening outside the city. The Red Wolves were plotting their retaliation elsewhere. However, Mac experienced a sense of purpose and responsibility for the first time in years. In its way, the neighborhood had shielded him, provided him with a place to hide, and allowed him to recover. Perhaps it was time to pay it forward. 3 days after the altercation, just before dawn, Spencer's diner window was broken by the first brick. The roar of motorbike motors faded into the distance as the sound of breaking glass reverberated throughout the deserted eatery. With her hands shaking, Laura stood amidst the dazzling shards and dialed Officer Bradley's phone. When Mac saw the damage, his face darkened as he arrived before the police. He started sweeping up the shattered glass without saying a word, his movements deliberate and accurate. He was joined in cleaning up by the morning regulars who arrived and observed the situation. Laura added, "You don't have to stay," as she observed Mac at work. "You are the reason they are focusing on the diner." Mac answered quietly but firmly. "That's precisely why I must remain." Local social worker Maria Ramirez held her clipboard to her chest as she cautiously made her way through the shattered glass. She had spent years helping with local homeless veterans, but things were becoming worse. She accepted a cup of coffee from Laura and informed that 3 more veterinarians were run off their regular positions yesterday night. As they mark their area, the Red Wolves are dispersing. "Mac, it's no longer just about you." More motorcycles roared past outside, this time more slowly. Smirking at the workers inside, Rage and Coyote assessed the damage without trying to cover their expressions. However, Mac saw a glimmer of uncertainty on Coyote's face that was swiftly covered up. Bradley showed up with a notepad, but everyone knew it would be in vain. No proof, no witnesses. Another instance of vandalism in an increasingly frequented neighborhood. Bradley examined the brick that had smashed through the window and remarked, "They're getting bolder." Irons were pushing them harder, attempting to prove something, and a red dragon had been spray-painted on its surface. Through the broken glass, Mac observed the street, evaluating sight lines, possible cover, and entry and escape locations as his military experience kicked in. His tactical intellect, which had lain asleep for so long, was beginning to awaken. Morgan, Mr. Maria stepped forward warily. "I was asked to thank a few of the vets from under the bridge. Claimed to have been feeding them and showing them secure sleeping quarters." Mac's posture changed somewhat, but he didn't answer immediately. He had kept his nightly actions to himself, guiding other homeless veterans through the streets, which were becoming more and more hazardous. As the morning went on and additional neighbors arrived, he didn't bring up the subject. Some wanted to express their support, while others offered assistance with repairs. It was an obvious message. For this community, Spencer's Diner held special significance. Over coffee, a frequent customer reported that they also attacked Pete's Hardware last night. Because he allowed that homeless vet to sleep in his doorway, he broke the windows of his delivery truck. Mac's mouth clenched. One of the few business owners who was compassionate to the homeless, Pete was a good man. He had to pay for it now. Coyote had to face Iron's wrath in a dark garage across town. Instead than appreciating our craftsmanship, you should be observing the diner. Coyote resisted his leader's rage, saying, "I was watching. However, perhaps we ought to. What should be done?" Iron had a dangerous voice. "Be weak? Allow a broken-down vet to deceive us?" In the corner, Venom stood with an enigmatic look. The power dynamics in the club were changing. Iron's obsession with vengeance and his increasingly unpredictable actions were being questioned by some of the younger members. Mac sat with Derek and Maria back at the diner, making plans. The figures for the social workers were dismal. More areas are becoming hazardous for the homeless, and more veterans are being relocated. Maria spread out the designs and stated, "The old community center on Pine Street. It's ideal for our needs. Meeting spaces, sleeping quarters, and a kitchen. However, that block has been used by the Red Wolves for their operations." Leaning forward, Derek looked over the plans. "The city councils are taking a long time to approve. Like everyone else, they are afraid of the wolves." "Not everyone," Mac clarified, keeping his gaze on the road. In the past hour, he had seen 3 additional members of the group riding by. Their trends are too consistent to be coincidental. They had something in the works. Laura, whose uneasiness was evident in her movements, brought more coffee. She had been scared by the incident in the morning, but her voice was determined. "We're not going to close. This eatery remains open." After his patrol, Bradley warned that they would return. Iron now has a claim to make. Even his own people are beginning to question him. Mac gave a slow nod. Although the tactical situation was getting worse, there was also an opportunity. A fragmented gang was a vulnerable gang. A young soldier with bruises on his face hobbled into the diner. He was someone Mac knew from the streets. A former army medic named Jimmy slept in the park. He accepted Laura's coffee and said, "They're clearing us out," claimed that anyone discovered in their domain after nightfall is fair game. The ramifications were obvious. Mac was no longer the exclusive target of the Red Wolves. They were using violence and intimidation to mark their area, targeting all homeless veterans. Mac got up, having made up his mind. This time, the warrior he had attempted to abandon was required for leadership and protection rather than for fighting. Speaking to the tiny gathering, he stated, "We need to coordinate. Lookouts, communication, and safe paths." Despite their homelessness, These men are still serving in the military. They can still remember how to work. With a mixture of worry and optimism, Maria raised her head from her clipboard. Are you referring to forming a network of homeless veterans or something? That is precisely what I am referring to. Mac's voice had the subdued authority of a man who had served in conflict. Does Iron desire war? All right, but it will be on our terms rather than his. Now the morning sun was fully up, blazing across the diner floor in splintered rainbows through the smashed window. Mac stood tall and straight in its light, more like the former Special Forces captain than the homeless veteran he had become. This would not be fought with fists and anger, but the battle lines were being set. It would be waged with community, with strategy, and with the strength that comes from defending others. They didn't know what the Red Wolves had begun, but it had awakened a whole brotherhood of lost troops, not just one old warrior. Mac walked silently amid the shadows as the pre-dawn light filtered through the streets of Seattle. He was followed by 3 other veterans, whose movements revealed remnants of training from long before. For days now, they had been observing the Red Wolves' patterns and become familiar with their habits. A voice crackled in his earpiece. 2 blocks away, Jimmy, the former medic, was on a rooftop. On Pike, 2 bikes are riding south. It appears to be a coyote and pandemonium. Mac signaled his team to hold position by raising his hand. They were there for prevention, not conflict. In the last week, a dozen homeless veterans have vanished from the streets due to increased gang violence. Another voice said, they're hitting Pete's Hardware again. Derek grabbed bats and spray cans and watched from his pickup parked around the corner. Mac's voice hardly made a sound. Maintain positions. Allow them to initiate contact. When the gang members noticed 4 figures stepping out of the darkness, they halted their approach to Pete's business. Not combative, just there, observing. Frustrated, the bikers revved their motors and eventually left. Just another failed attempt at intimidation, with no violence or vandalism. Laura was back at Spencer's diner, serving coffee to the veterans who now routinely gathered there in the early morning. Donations from the community have been used to replace the damaged window. The diner was no longer merely a dining establishment. It was turning into a headquarters. Spreading a map on the counter, Derek said, this is the 3rd time they've backed down this week. Blue markings indicated veteran patrol routes, while red marks indicated gang activity. They're growing irritated. Maria annotated the map with her own remarks. The idea for a community center was discussed during today's city council meeting. Local companies are now supporting us. They've had enough of spending money on protection. Max's tactical intellect examined the map, looking for trends. Even while the Red Wolves were being restrained and pushed back, their menace increased. Iron's command was growing more and more unpredictable. Officer Bradley joined them with new information, confirming that he is losing control. Yesterday, 2 of his lieutenants attempted to break away from the group. Both were admitted to the hospital by Iron. With anxious gestures, Laura set out fresh coffee cups in front of everyone. However, is this improving or worsening the situation? They're becoming desperate. Jimmy's anxious voice on the radio cut Max off in the middle of his reply. Alert, a large throng is approaching the diner. They're being led by Iron. As the roar of motorcycles increased in volume, the morning patrons became anxious. At least a dozen bikes were present this time, but something was different. The formation lacked discipline and was messy. Iron dismounted his bike, and Mac could feel the strain in his posture through the window. Remain composed, Mac said softly. Showing strength, not using it, is the goal here. Iron barged through the door of the diner. His face contorted with anger, but the obvious skepticism on his supporters' features took away from his customary swagger. A few of them avoided looking at Mac. With a hint of desperation in his voice, Iron stated, "This ends now. You're done acting like a military on my land." Mac got to his feet slowly and deliberately. The other veterans at the diner followed suit, being presents but not menacing. All set. The veterans' discipline stood in stark contrast to the gang's disarray. Your domain. Despite being quiet, Mac's voice could be heard over the quiet. Iron, look about. You no longer frighten these individuals. Coyote grasped Iron's arm before he could reach for whatever he was holding, even though Iron's fingers jerked toward his jacket. The boss is not present. There are too many witnesses. With rage in his eyes, the gang leader whirled around on his subordinate. Now you're asking me questions. Like the others? The room's tension changed. Territories were no longer the only issue. It was about the disintegration of a gang. Although he spotted the chance, Mac spoke at a level tone. Iron, your own people can see it. This isn't working anymore. The neighborhood's changing. Through the windows, more people had gathered. Shop owners, residents, workers, watching, filming with their phones. Iron's power was built on fear, and fear was evaporating in the morning light. You think this changes anything? Iron's voice rose, increasingly unstable. You're still nothing. Just a broken-down vet playing hero. No, Mac replied, his calm certainty a sharp contrast to Iron's fury. I'm a soldier who remembers his duty, and I'm not alone. As if to emphasize his point, more veterans appeared outside the diner. Not confrontational, not threatening. Just standing together. A brotherhood reforged by necessity. Maria stepped forward, holding up her phone. City council's watching this too, Iron. Live stream. The whole city can see what's happening here. Iron's face contorted as he looked around the diner, seeing not submission, but quiet defiance in every face. His own gang members were shifting uncomfortably, the doubt in their expressions growing stronger. This isn't over, he snarled, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. You'll see. You'll all see. As the gang leader stormed out, several of his members hesitated, looking back at the scene in the diner. The contrast was clear. Iron's crumbling authority against the quiet strength of community standing together. Mac watched them leave, his tactical mind already planning next steps. The confrontation had revealed fractures in the gang, opportunities that could be exploited without violence. They'll be back, Bradley warned, but his voice carried a note of hope. But maybe not all of them. Iron's losing his grip. Laura began refilling coffee cups, her movements more confident now. So what's our next move? Mac turned to the map still spread across the counter, its markings showing the changing tide of neighborhood control. We keep building, keep watching, keep showing them a better way. The morning sun had fully risen now, illuminating a diner full of people who had found purpose in standing together. The war for the neighborhood wasn't over, but the battlefield had shifted. It wasn't about territory anymore. It was about community, about redemption, about showing that even the forgotten could find strength in unity. The attack came without warning. Jimmy never saw the chain that wrapped around his neck, dragging him into the alley behind Pete's Hardware. Four Red Wolves members emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden by bandanas. The beating was swift, brutal, and meant to send a message. Mac found him an hour later, barely conscious. As Dr. Bennett treated Jimmy's injuries at the VA hospital, Mac's expression remained stone cold, his hands clenched into fists. This wasn't random violence. This was Iron escalating the war. 3 broken ribs, Dr. Bennett reported, her voice tight with controlled anger. Concussion. They knew what they were doing. Hurt him enough to send a message, but not enough to kill him. Laura paced the hospital waiting room. Her face pale. This is getting out of control. First the vandalism, now this. Mac's phone buzzed, an unknown number. The message was brief. Need to talk. About Iron. Coyote wanted to meet. It could be a trap, but Mac's instincts told him otherwise. He had seen the doubt growing in the younger biker's eyes, the hesitation during recent confrontations. "I'm coming with you," Derek declared when Mac mentioned the message. "You're not facing this alone." The meeting point was neutral ground. The old fishing pier, late evening. Coyote was alone, his usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. His leather vest was conspicuously absent. Irons lost it. Coyote spoke quickly, glancing over his shoulder. "He's talking about firebombing the diner, making examples of anyone who helps veterans. Half the crew wants out, but he's got dirt on everyone." Mac studied the U-ing biker's face, reading the fear there. "Why tell us this?" "Because people are going to die if this continues." Coyote's voice cracked. "My old man was a vet, Navy. Died homeless because nobody would help him. I can't." He trailed off, emotion choking his words. Back at Spencer's diner, Maria spread out updated plans for the community center. The city council had expedited the approval process after Jimmy's attack made the news. Public sentiment was shifting. "We've got funding," she announced. "Anonymous donors, enough to renovate the whole building." Officer Bradley examined the police reports on his laptop. Irons getting sloppy. Making mistakes. "We've got witnesses coming forward about protection rackets, drug running." Laura placed fresh coffee on the table, her hands steady despite the weight of recent events. The diner had become more fortified. Security cameras, reinforced windows, veterans keeping watch in shifts. "They hit 2 more patrol spots last night," Derek reported, pointing to the map. "Getting more violent each time. Irons trying to prove he's still in control." Mac absorbed the information, his tactical mind processing patterns. "He's desperate. Desperate men make mistakes." A crash from outside made everyone jump. A brick had shattered the front window. Again. But this time, security cameras caught everything. The footage showed chaos and venom, their faces clearly visible. "That's assault with a deadly weapon," Bradley said, watching the replay. "Clear as day. I can bring them in now." But before he could move, more motorcycles roared past the diner. Not just 2 or 3 this time. Dozens. The Red Wolves were out in force, Iron leading them like a dark parade. "He's trying to show strength," Mac observed. "But look closer." Through the broken window, they could see the gang members' formation was ragged, undisciplined. Some riders kept their distance from Iron, their body language showing clear reluctance. Coyote's burner phone buzzed in Mac's pocket. "Iron knows. Had to run. Coming for you tonight. Full force." Laura read the message over Mac's shoulder, her face paling. "What do we do?" Mac's response was calm, measured. "We get ready. Call everyone in." The next hour was a blur of activity. Veterans arrived in groups, taking up positions. Local business owners locked up their shops but stayed inside, phones ready to record whatever happened next. Dr. Bennett arrived with medical supplies, her car packed with first aid kits. The VA's on standby. "We've got beds ready if needed." Maria coordinated with emergency services, ensuring ambulances and police were nearby but not visible. The neighborhood held its breath, waiting. As night fell, the sound of motorcycles grew louder. Not just the Red Wolves this time. Other gangs too. Iron had called in favors, determined to make his show of force overwhelming. At least 30 bikes, Derek reported from his lookout position. Maybe more coming. Mac surveyed the veterans gathered in and around the diner. Former soldiers, sailors, Marines, men and women who had seen real combat, who knew the difference between bravado and true strength. "This ends tonight," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of command. "One way or another." Laura touched his arm gently. "Mac, we can call the police, evacuate." "No, he cut her off. Running isn't the answer. Not anymore. Outside, the motorcycles grew closer. Iron's voice could be heard over the engines, shouting orders. But even in his commands, there was a note of desperation. Coyote's words echoed in Mac's mind. People are going to die if this continues. The young biker had been right. This had to end. But it had to end the right way. Mac stepped out onto the sidewalk directly under the diner's lights. One man, standing alone but representing something larger. Community, brotherhood. The strength that comes from protecting others. Behind him, dozens of veterans emerged from doorways and shadows. Not advancing, not threatening, just present, ready. The contrast was stark. Iron's chaos against their discipline, his desperation against their resolve. The moment stretched, taut as a wire. The neighborhood held its breath, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. The war for the streets had reached its turning point, and there would be no going back. The street in front of Spencer's diner had become a battleground. Motorcycles formed a semicircle of chrome and steel. Headlights cutting through the evening fog like searchlights. Iron stood at the center, his massive frame trembling with barely contained rage as he faced Mac and the assembled veterans. Last chance, Iron's voice carried over the rumbling engines. Clear out now, or we burn everything to the ground. Mac remained still, his posture relaxed but alert. Behind him, dozens of veterans held their positions. Doorways, rooftops, alleyways. No weapons visible, but their presence spoke of carefully coordinated strategy. You're done here, Iron. Mac's voice was calm, carrying the weight of command. Look around, really look. Your own people don't believe in this anymore. Iron spun to face his gang, but something had changed. The usual intimidating formation was breaking down. Several riders had killed their engines, creating islands of silence in the mechanical thunder. Who's with me? Iron roared, desperation creeping into his voice. Show these has-beens what the Red Wolves are made of. But the response wasn't what he expected. Coyote stepped off his bike first, removing his gang colors deliberately. 2 more followed, then 3 more. The dissolution of Iron's authority was happening in real time. Witnessed by dozens of phones recording from windows above. Traitors. Iron's voice cracked as he drew a heavy chain from his bike. I'll show you what happens to traitors. He charged forward, chain whipping through the air toward Coyote. But Mac was already moving, years of combat training taking over. His hand caught the chain mid-swing, wrapping it around his forearm as he stepped inside Iron's reach. The gang leader's momentum worked against him. Mac's other hand shot up, catching Iron's throat in a precise hold. Not choking, just controlling. The bigger man froze, suddenly aware of how completely he was at Mac's mercy. It's over, Mac said quietly for Iron's ears alone. You can end this with dignity or you can leave in cuffs. Your choice. Venom revved his engine, drawing attention. For a moment it seemed he might charge the veteran's line. But then he too killed his engine, removing his colors. He's right, Venom called out. This ain't what we signed up for. We're supposed to be a brotherhood, not terrorists. Officer Bradley emerged from the shadows, badge reflecting in the motorcycle headlights. Make your choice, Iron. We've got enough evidence to put you away for years. Or you can walk away now. Leave the neighborhood in peace. Iron's eyes darted wildly, seeing his power structure crumble in real time. The chain slipped from his fingers, clattering on the asphalt like a symbol of his fallen authority. You're nothing, he spat at Mac. But the words sounded hollow. Just a broken-down vet who got lucky. Mac released him, stepping back. No, I'm a soldier who remembered his duty. And these men? He gestured to the veterans around them. They're not broken. They just needed to be reminded of who they are. Laura emerged from the diner, coffee pot in hand. The simple domestic gesture somehow diffused the remaining tension. Anyone who wants coffee and conversation is welcome inside. No colors, no grudges. It started with Coyote, then spread. Bikers began removing their gang insignias, accepting coffee from Laura. Veterans mixed with former adversaries, sharing stories of service and struggle. Dr. Bennett arrived with her medical kit, but found herself treating more wounded pride than physical injuries. The night that had threatened violence was transforming into something unexpected. A beginning rather than an end. Iron stood alone now, watching his former empire dissolve into something he couldn't control or understand. His shoulders sagged, the fight leaving him like air from a punctured tire. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. James's response was measured. "Now we rebuild the right way. These streets don't need another gang. They need a community." Maria appeared with papers in hand, her eyes bright with possibility. "The community center plans are approved. We could use some help with the renovation. People who know how to organize, how to lead." Iron stared at her, uncomprehending. The idea of transformation rather than destruction was foreign to him. But around him, his former gang members were already engaging, asking questions, seeing possibilities. Derek approached James, grinning. "Not bad for a homeless vet, huh? Think this will stick?" James watched the scene unfolding. Former enemies sharing coffee, trading stories, beginning to see each other as people rather than threats. "It'll stick if we make it stick. Community stronger than fear." Officer Bradley was coordinating with other police units, standing down the response teams that had been ready for violence. "Cities watching," he reported. "This could be a model for other neighborhoods." The fog had lifted now, revealing stars above the city streets. The motorcycle engines were silent, their riders now inside the diner or talking in small groups on the sidewalk. The night that had promised chaos had delivered something else entirely. Hope. Laura touched James's arm gently. "You knew this would happen. That they'd stand down." "No," he admitted. "But I knew we had to try. Sometimes the biggest battles are won without throwing a punch." Inside Spencer's diner, former gang members sat alongside veterans, their conversations ranging from military service to neighborhood improvement plans. The transformation wasn't complete. There would be struggles ahead, resistance to change, old habits to break. But something fundamental had shifted on these streets. James stood in the doorway watching the scene with quiet satisfaction. The warrior in him recognized this victory as more significant than any battlefield triumph. A victory of community over chaos, of hope over fear. The night that had threatened to tear the neighborhood apart had instead begun to heal it. One cup of coffee, one conversation, one small act of understanding at a time. Dawn broke over Seattle with a different energy than the city had seen in months. The streets around Spencer's diner were quiet, but not with the usual tension. Instead, there was a sense of possibility in the air, of change taking root in concrete and asphalt. James sat at his usual booth watching the sunrise through windows that now held community meeting point signs alongside the daily specials. The night's events had left physical and emotional marks throughout the neighborhood. Discarded gang colors lay in parking lots like shed snake skins, while small groups of former Red Wolves members gathered on corners, talking quietly among themselves. Laura worked behind the counter, serving breakfast to an unusual mix of customers. Veterans sat alongside former gang members, their conversations ranging from military service to construction experience. The community center renovation was the main topic, providing a focus for all this redirected energy. "City inspectors coming at 9, Maria announced, spreading blueprints across a table. "We've got contractors ready to start work, but we need volunteers for the initial cleanup." Coyote, still adjusting to life without his gang colors, stepped forward. "I know construction, used to work jobs before. Before all this, got others who'd help too." James observed the young man's initiative with quiet approval. The transformation was already beginning, former adversaries finding common ground in practical tasks. Dr. Bennett arrived with news from the VA. "We've got approval for the outreach program. The community center can be an official veteran support hub, but we need staff, people who understand both sides of this situation." Her eyes met James's, the question unspoken, but clear. He had become a bridge between worlds, the homeless veteran who had earned respect from all sides. Outside, Officer Bradley was dealing with media crews drawn by the previous night's events. The story was spreading, a neighborhood turning itself around, led by an unlikely alliance of veterans and reformed gang members. "Channel 4 wants an interview," Bradley told James. "City council's interested too. This could be a model for other neighborhoods." James shook his head. "Let the results speak for themselves. We need actions now, not words." The diner's door chimed as Iron entered, alone. The room tensed briefly, but the former gang leader's demeanor had changed. His swagger was gone, replaced by something more uncertain. "Came to get my things from the clubhouse," he announced to no one in particular. "Moving up north, fresh start." James watched him carefully, noting the defeat in his posture, but also something else. Relief, perhaps, at no longer having to maintain his fierce persona. "Could use some help loading up," Iron added awkwardly. "Got some tools, equipment, stuff that might be useful for the center." It was an olive branch, offered clumsily but sincerely. Several veterans and former gang members stood to help, the simple act of moving furniture becoming a symbol of transition. Laura approached James's booth with a fresh coffee pot. "You knew this would happen. That they'd want to change." "Everyone wants purpose," James replied, watching the impromptu moving crew organize itself. "Sometimes they just need a reason to find it." Derek entered with more veterans in tow. New arrivals drawn by word of mouth, seeking the community that was forming. The diner was becoming too small for all the activity. "Got calls from 3 other neighborhoods," Derek reported. "They're hearing about what happened, want to know how to start something similar." Maria's phone buzzed with messages from city officials. The mayor's office was interested in the program, seeing potential for broader application. What had started as a local conflict was expanding into something larger. "We need to be careful," James cautioned. "Change has to come from inside the community, not from top-down mandates." Dr. Bennett nodded in agreement, "But we can provide the framework, show them what's possible when people work together." The morning progressed with a steady stream of activity. Former Red Wolves members arrived throughout the day, turning in weapons and gang paraphernalia, asking about construction work or veteran services. Each one was met with respect, given tasks that utilize their skills. "It's not just about the building," James explained to a group of newcomers. "It's about creating something sustainable, something that belongs to all of us." Laura had moved beyond coffee service, organizing meal preparations for work crews. The diner was evolving into a command center for community rehabilitation. "Might need to expand," she mused, watching the crowded room. "Maybe add a community kitchen to the center plans." Coyote approached James with several other former gang members. "We've been talking. Some of us, we've got skills. Could help with security, keep things safe while we're rebuilding. Do it right this time." The suggestion held promise, former troublemakers becoming protectors, using their street knowledge for community benefit. James saw the potential for healing in such role reversal. "Start with the basics," he advised. "Learn to work together first. The rest will follow." As evening approached, the day's energy showed no signs of fading. Work crews were organizing for the next day. Planning sessions sprawled across multiple tables, and new alliances were forming over shared meals. James stood in the diner's doorway, watching the transformed street scene, where once there had been tension and fear, now there was purposeful activity. It wasn't perfect. There would be setbacks, resistances, old habits to overcome. But the change was real, rooted in something stronger than fear or force. "You did this," Laura said, joining him at the door. James shook his head. "We all did this. Sometimes people just need to be reminded of their own strength." The sun was setting over Seattle, casting long shadows across streets that felt different now. In those shadows, a new community was taking shape, built on the understanding that redemption was possible, that purpose was stronger than pain, and that even the deepest wounds could heal with the right kind of help. Reality hit hard in the first week after the confrontation. The morning crowd at Spencer's diner watched as Rage, one of the former Red Wolves, was led away in handcuffs. He'd fallen back into old habits, attempted to extort money from a local shop. The incident cast a shadow over the fragile progress they'd made. James stood in the half-demolished community center, dust-coating his worn jacket as he surveyed the work ahead. The building's interior had been gutted, revealing years of neglect and damage. Like the people they were trying to help, it needed more than just surface repairs. 3 more dropped out of the program yesterday, Dr. Bennett reported, picking her way through construction debris. The transition's harder than they expected. Old temptations, old connections pulling them back. Coyote appeared in a doorway, tool belt slung low on his hips, fresh scratches on his hands from honest work. "We knew it wouldn't be easy, but we're not giving up on them. Not like everyone else did." The young man had emerged as a natural leader, his street knowledge blending with a newfound sense of purpose. He understood both worlds, the allure of gang life and the harder path of redemption. Laura arrived with coffee and sandwiches for the work crew, her diner now running a constant supply line to the renovation project. Channel 7 is outside again, they want interviews, success stories. "Too soon," James replied, helping distribute the food. "People need time to change, real change, not just for the cameras." His own demons had been surfacing lately, triggered by the stress and responsibility. Nightmares of Kandahar came more frequently now, memories he tried to bury in years of homeless wandering. Derek gathered a group of veterans and former gang members for a planning session, using overturned buckets as seats. The mix of military precision and street survival skills was creating something unique. A grassroots rehabilitation program unlike anything the city had seen. "City's getting nervous," Officer Bradley reported, joining them on his break. "Other gangs are watching what's happening here. Some see opportunity, others see threat." James nodded, understanding the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. "We're changing the ecosystem, there's going to be pushback." A crash from above made everyone jump. A worker had knocked over a scaffold section, the sound echoing through the gutted building. Several former gang members instinctively reached for weapons that weren't there anymore, old reflexes dying hard. "See that?" Dr. Bennett observed quietly. "PTSD isn't just for combat vets, these kids have their own trauma to process." The day progressed with small victories and setbacks. A former Red Dragon helped a homeless veteran navigate VA paperwork. Another relapsed and disappeared back into the streets. Each success and failure added to the growing understanding of what they were really facing. "We need more structure," Maria suggested, reviewing their progress. "Job training, counseling, practical skills. These guys need more than just construction work." Laura's voice carried across the space. "Diner's too small now. We need a proper kitchen here, meeting spaces, classrooms maybe." James watched the interaction. And between veterans and former gang members, seeing both the progress and the potential pitfalls. Some adapted quickly to the new order, finding purpose in honest work. Others struggled, the pull of their old life still strong. "Got word from downtown," Bradley said, pulling James aside. "Other neighborhoods are seeing increased gang activity, like they're testing boundaries, seeing if what happened here can happen elsewhere." The implications were clear. Their success or failure here could influence the entire city. The pressure to get it right weighed heavily on everyone. Coyote approached with a group of former Red Wolves. Some of the guys are worried. Word is the North Side crew's moving in, thinking we're weak now. James studied their faces, young men trying to walk a new path while carrying the weight of their past. We're not weak. We're building something stronger than fear. A delivery truck arrived with donated supplies, tools, building materials, office equipment. The driver, a Vietnam veteran, insisted on helping unload. Another small thread in the growing web of community support. This is bigger than us now, Derek observed, watching the spontaneous organization of the unloading crew. It's becoming a movement. Dr. Bennett was conducting informal counseling sessions in what would become the center's medical office. They're starting to open up, talk about their fears, their hopes. It's not just about avoiding jail anymore. As evening approached, James found himself back at Spencer's diner. The usual crowd had evolved. Veterans and former gang members sharing meals, planning sessions spilling across multiple tables, new alliances forming over coffee and conversation. Laura joined him at his regular booth. "You're worried about something." "Change is fragile," he replied, watching the diverse group. One bad incident, one wrong move, and it all could collapse. Outside, the street had a different energy now. People walked more freely. Shops stayed open later. But there were still shadows, still dangers. Other gangs watching, waiting. Former members struggling with temptation. The real work was just beginning. "We're not just fixing a building," James told the evening crew as they finished up. "We're rebuilding lives. That takes time, patience, and understanding when people stumble." The sun set over Seattle, casting long shadows through the community center's broken windows. In those shadows, people who had once been enemies worked side by side, learning to trust, to believe in something bigger than themselves. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real change. Happening one day at a time. One person at a time. Built on the understanding that everyone deserved a chance at redemption. The first warning came at midnight. A Molotov cocktail thrown through the community center's newly installed windows. The fire was contained quickly, but the message was clear. The North Side crew wasn't going to let their territory expand without a fight. James surveyed the damage in the pre-dawn hours. His military training assessing vulnerabilities, planning defenses. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, mixing with the morning fog rolling in from Puget Sound. "Could have been worse," Coyote observed, sweeping up broken glass. "They're testing us, seeing how we respond." The young man's assessment was accurate. James had seen similar tactics in war zones. Probing attacks designed to gauge resistance. But this wasn't Afghanistan or Iraq. This was Seattle. And the enemy wasn't insurgents, but another kind of darkness altogether. Laura arrived with coffee and grim news. They hit Pete's Hardware too, and left messages at 3 other businesses. "They're saying the neighborhood needs real protection now." Officer Bradley was examining the evidence, his face tight with concern. "This is organized. The North Side crew's never been this bold before. Something's changed." James watched as veterans and former Red Wolves worked together to repair the damage. The attack had an unexpected effect, strengthening the bonds between former enemies who now shared a common purpose. "They think we're weak," Derek said, joining James by the broken window. "Think we've gone soft because we're trying to help people instead of intimidating them." Dr. Bennett arrived earlier than usual, her medical bag in hand. "2 of our people were jumped last night. Nothing serious, but they're scared. Talking about going back to their old crews for protection." The morning sun revealed more damage than initially apparent. Spray-painted threats marked walls throughout the neighborhood. The North Side crew was making a statement, claiming territory through fear and intimidation. "We need to respond," Coyote urged, his old gang instincts surfacing. "Show them we're not easy targets. James's voice cut through the growing tension. "We respond smart, not angry. We're not a gang, we're something stronger." The community center's main room became a command center. Veterans applied military strategy to urban defense, while former gang members contributed crucial street intelligence. Maps were spread out, patterns analyzed, weaknesses identified. "They've got reach," Bradley reported, pointing to marked locations. "Drug operations, protection rackets, connections with suppliers up north. This isn't just about territory anymore." Laura's diner had become a fortress of sorts, a safe haven where people could gather and plan. But even there, tension was visible in nervous glances and hushed conversations. "3 businesses asked about protection today," Maria announced, her clipboard filled with notes. "They're scared the North Side crew will make examples of them." James stood at the center of the room, his presence drawing everyone's attention. "We built something here, something real. We're not going back to rule by fear." The day progressed with purposeful activity. Veterans taught defensive tactics to former gang members. Security systems were installed, communication networks established. The neighborhood was organizing, not in fear, but in determination. "Got word from some old contacts," Coyote reported quietly to James. "North Side's planning something big. They want to shut us down before others follow our example." Dr. Bennett worked overtime, treating injuries both physical and psychological. The trauma's surfacing again, for everyone. Veterans, former gang members, they're all feeling the pressure. As evening approached, more reports came in. The North Side crew was mobilizing, gathering forces. The streets grew quiet, that peculiar stillness before a storm. "They don't understand what they're dealing with," Derek observed, watching the preparations. "They think we're just another crew trying to hold territory." James moved through the community center, checking positions, reinforcing resolve. He saw not broken men and reformed criminals, but warriors of a different kind. People fighting for redemption, for community, for hope. "Whatever comes," he told them, "we face it together. Not as gangs, not as separate units, but as one community." Laura brought food to the workers, her movements betraying worry, but her voice steady. "The whole neighborhood's watching. They need to know we won't abandon them." Night fell over Seattle, but the community center blazed with light. Inside, veterans and former gang members prepared for whatever might come. The transformation they'd begun was being tested, forcing them to prove their new principles under fire. "This is the real test," James told the assembled group. "Not just of our strength, but of our commitment to change. We defend without becoming what we're fighting against." Outside, motorcycles could be heard in the distance. Not the familiar rumble of the former Red Wolves, but something more menacing. The North Side crew was making their presence known, circling like wolves testing for weakness. Coyote stood at the window, his face reflecting both his past and his present. "They think fear is power. We need to show them something different." The night deepened, tension mounting with each passing hour. But in the community center and throughout the neighborhood, people stood together. Veterans, former gang members, business owners, residents, united not by fear, but by the determination to protect what they had built. James's final instructions were simple. "We protect each other. We protect our community. But we do it the right way. That's what makes us different. That's what makes us stronger." The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of a neighborhood, but the possibility of redemption itself. The question wasn't whether they would fight, but how they would fight, and what they would become in the process. The North Side crew arrived at midnight, their motorcycles roaring through the streets like thunder, but instead of finding a vulnerable neighborhood, they encountered something unexpected. Every street corner had watchers. Every alley was monitored. Veterans and former gang members stood together. A disciplined presence that spoke of both military training and street wisdom. James observed from Spencer's diner as the first wave of bikes circled the neighborhood. He counted 30 riders, with more arriving. The North Side Crew's leader, a man known only as Razor Wire, sat astride a massive black motorcycle, his face hidden behind a skull-themed helmet. "They're trying to surround us," Coyote reported through the radio network they'd established. "Got groups moving in from all directions." Inside the diner, Dr. Bennett had set up a makeshift medical station, with Laura and Maria organizing supplies. The community center served as a secondary base, its newly reinforced windows dark, but far from empty. "Police are standing by," Bradley informed James quietly. "But they're under orders not to intervene unless there's clear criminal activity. We're on our own unless things get out of hand." James's voice was steady as he addressed the defenders. "Remember the plan. We're not here to fight. We're here to protect. Show them what real strength looks like." The North Side Crew's first move was predictable. A group of riders charged down Main Street, baseball bats swinging at windows. But they found their path blocked by parked cars, strategically placed to create choke points. In the confusion, several riders went down, their bikes sliding across the asphalt. "Now," James commanded. Veterans emerged from doorways, their movements coordinated and precise. Former Red Wolves members appeared from alleys, not with weapons, but with phones, recording everything. The fallen riders found themselves surrounded, not by violence, but by witnesses. Razor Wire's voice boomed through the night. "You think this changes anything? This neighborhood belongs to us now." James stepped into the street, alone but radiating authority. "Look around you. Really look. This isn't about territory anymore." From windows and rooftops, lights began to come on. Locals came out onto stoops and balconies, recording on their phones and providing testimony. There was no fear in the area. They were all standing together. Coyote yelled at his erstwhile street opponents, "You're outnumbered. By community, not by warriors. This is the appearance of true power." Uneasy with the united front they were facing, a few of the North Side horsemen started to retreat. They hadn't anticipated such an easy prey. This was a very different matter. Construction equipment from the community center restoration blocked the way of a second group of bikers that rushed in from a side street. More veterans and repentant gang members were standing behind the machinery, their posture defensive rather than combative. James said, "Last chance," his voice rising above the thunder of motors. "If you don't leave now, everything you do will be noted and reported. You have an option." Despite their initial opposition, the fallen riders received treatment from Dr. Bennett. Several of them were uneasy about her cool professionalism in the face of their threats. Enemies were not meant to behave in this manner. "Can you see the difference?" While she was bandaging a teenage rider's arm, she asked him. "This is the appearance of community. You might be a part of this." Frustrated, Razor Wire revved his engine. The tactics of intimidation employed by his crew were failing. They encountered order and solidarity rather than disorder and terror. "Do you believe that being kind makes you strong?" He put James to the test. "You're only weakening yourself." James gave a cautious answer. "Fear is not a sign of true power. You wouldn't understand, but it's about standing together." Now, more locals were coming out with support, first aid supplies, and water. Instead of firearms, the North Side Crew was surrounded by witnesses, cameras, and phones. A community banded together to resist their intimidation. With the coffee pot in hand, Laura left the diner. The basic household gesture had power of its own. "We invite anyone who wishes to discuss change to come in. Anyone looking for trouble should go. Right now." The moment was long and full of opportunities. The motorcyclists on the north side then started to retreat one by one. Not in terror, but in perplexity. They had no idea how to wage this conflict. Razor Wire said, "This isn't over," but his warning sounded vacuous. You're correct, James concurred. Not in the way you imagine, but it's just getting started. The neighborhood burst into silent jubilation as the bikers withdrew into the darkness. People gathering together, checking in on one another, and strengthening the ties that had been established, not with applause or boasts. Coyote walked up to James and shook his head in wonder. We didn't need to and didn't throw a single punch. That's what it is, James said. Violence isn't what true strength is. It has to do with community. Officer Bradley took a satisfied look around the situation. Captured everything on video. Every warning, every attack attempt. They won't return anytime soon. While Laura poured coffee for both residents and defenders, Dr. Bennett attended to minor injuries inside the café. Something significant had been established by the happenings of the night. It was more than simply homeless veterans or gang members who had changed their ways. It was about a whole community discovering its own power. James quietly took satisfaction in the scene. It was the neighborhood's first true test, which it passed with unity rather than force. The word would get out. There was a better, alternative method. Now what? As she updated her ubiquitous clipboard, Maria inquired. Now, we build on this, James replied. Demonstrate to other communities what can be achieved when people band together. Instead of threatening violence, the night had shown something more potent. The power of a group of people who share a common goal and defend one another by presence rather than force. Overnight, the cell phone footage of the altercation with the Northside crew went viral. Outside Spencer's Cafe, news vans were parked along the street, their satellite dishes extending like mechanical flowers toward the morning sky. James's coffee grew cold as he watched the broadcast inside with increasing uneasiness. Reporters are referring to it as the Seattle solution as they attempted to get his attention through the window. Maria said as she displayed the tablet's headlines to him. Already, 3 other neighborhoods have contacted us to inquire about how to launch their own initiatives. As more volunteers joined the effort, the community center's renovations accelerated, and it was a hive of activity. Coyote oversaw a group of ex-gang members that taught newcomers building skills. He had a stunning metamorphosis in a matter of weeks, going from enforcer to mentor. Bradley sat down in the booth opposite James and explained that the city council wanted to speak with you. Also the mayor's office. They are discussing financing comparable initiatives throughout Seattle. James's reaction was measured in a typical way. Because it originated with the community rather than with politicians, this was successful. With eager eyes, Dr. Bennett showed up with a large folder of documents. Our pilot program, which includes full funding for job training, housing aid, and rehabilitation programs for veterans, was authorized by the VAs. They wished to adopt our approach across the country. The achievement presented new difficulties. Now the daily planning sessions were taking up too much space in Laura's diner. Former gang members sought a route out of their previous lives, while veterans from all around the city came in search of meaning. As she saw the mob cram themselves into her diner, Laura said, "We need more space. Also, more structure. It's larger than we anticipated." James observed the area he had assisted in transforming from the window. Once dominated by terror, the streets were now alive with creative activity. However, pressure, expectations, and obligations accompanied success. Coyote claimed that he had word from some people in Tacoma. The gangs are anxious down there. There are those who wish to oppose our actions. Others are curious about it. The planning discussion from the morning overflowed onto the pavement. Maria planned community engagement, and Derek worked with veteran organizations. Beyond their original plan, the operation had expanded and taken on a life of its own. Bradley held up his phone and said, "They want you on the morning shows. People want to hear your tale because of the nationwide publicity." James gave a headshake. This has never been about me. But there was no escaping the gaze. Neighborhood cohesion, gang members' salvation, and the conversion of a homeless veteran into a community leader. It was the sort of tale that sparked hope and captivated imaginations. Coyote gladly revealed that 6 additional companies have joined the protection program. Some former Northside guys even expressed interest in joining the official one, where we teach community service and security. Dr. Bennett treated a constant flow of ex-gang members and veterans. Thanks to VA support, her office is now adequately furnished. She noted that the mending process is reciprocal. While the younger generation finds the mentorship they never had, the veterans find meaning in mentoring. Laura's voice broke through the diner's bustle. "You must see this, James." The footage from the altercation the night before was shown on the screen, but it wasn't the typical news report. Multiple phone films that showed the entire story, the community coming together, the peaceful settlement, and the strength of unity over force had been stitched together by someone. Maria said there were already 2 million views. Everywhere, people are sharing it. It is turning into a movement. James felt conflicted as he watched the screen. The broken soldier who had formerly haunted these streets didn't seem like the man they displayed, standing composed in the face of chaos. He felt the actual gravity of duty bearing down on him. Dr. Bennett added softly, "You've given people hope," acknowledging his uneasiness. This narrative reaches everyone, not just here. Attracted by the news attention, more veterans came outside. Other neighborhoods' ex-gang members came to for advice. The more space was needed, the more urgent it became to renovate the community center. Maria required that everything be documented. Make a model that other communities can follow. Let them know how to accomplish the same thing we've done here. James's voice echoed through the packed dining room. Keep in mind that individuals choose to stand together and believe in something greater than themselves, which is why this worked, not because of funds or programs. There was a spike in activity as the day went on. After seeing the Communi Thai Center, city authorities expressed their admiration for the advancements. Training sessions where veterans taught ex-gang members employment skills were captured on camera by news crews. The change was real, palpable, and evident. Coyote noted that recovery is no longer the only focus. We're creating something novel that has the potential to transform everything. However, risk accompanied expansion. James recognized it in the enthusiastic expressions of newcomers, the aspirational plans of politicians, and the increasing media coverage. If they weren't careful, success could ruin what made their program unique. As nighttime drew near, he addressed the core group, "We keep it genuine. Don't lose sight of people and communities. The rest is incidental." Long shadows were created through the diner's windows as the sun sank over Seattle. Even after the news vans had finally left, their influence persisted. They had created a little community that was going to grow into something bigger that may change people's lives throughout the city and possibly the entire nation. After hours of preparation and deliberation, James's coffee cup was now lukewarm, so Laura filled it again. "Are you comfortable with all of this?" James observed the varied crowd that filled her diner, veterans discovering their calling, ex-gang members discovering new careers, and neighbors cooperating. The change was more significant than any one individual or their locality. He answered, "It doesn't matter if I'm okay with it. It's taking place. All we have to do is make sure it goes smoothly." The night descended on the transformed neighborhood, bringing with it both new opportunities and difficulties. As word of their achievement spread, so did the optimism that things would change. However, the actual labor, the day-to-day endeavor to create and preserve community, was only getting started. Like a lightning strike, the morning news arrived. Violence had resulted from an attempt to duplicate their scheme in the Rainier Valley. A former gang member who was attempting to reform his life had died, and 2 veterans were in the hospital. The non-violent change they had promoted had become precisely what they had battled to stop. At Spencer's Diner, James sat in his usual seat, the physical weight of failure bearing down on him. Accusations were screaming from the media headlines. The peace program causes violence, and the Seattle solution results in tragedy. Laura poured a fresh cup of coffee in front of him and remarked, "It wasn't your fault. You have no control over how other people carry out the program." James, however, was wiser. He had given the Rainier Valley group hope, revealed their strategies, and offered advice. Hope was now reduced to ashes, and the promise of change was marred by blood. Dr. Bennett showed up early, the stress of a restless night evident on her face. She had been with the wounded veterans at the hospital, seeing their faith in the program erode as their bodies did. As she settled into the booth, she complained that they were moving too quickly and attempting to impose change rather than allowing it to happen organically. Instead of seeing it as an opportunity, the local gang viewed it as a danger. The media trucks were back outside, but this time they were asking accusing, incisive questions. Everything they had constructed was being called into question, along with the dream of peaceful transformation. Coyote's face tight with rage, he rushed through the door of the diner. "They claim that we are to blame and that we misled people. A few of my former acquaintances are already discussing a return to the previous state of affairs." The community center, which used to be a hive of activity, seemed empty today. Everyone was affected by the news, so the construction crews worked in silence. Suddenly, the hope they had created appeared to be in jeopardy. Program inquiries have been cancelled in 3 additional neighborhoods. Maria declared that she had only bad news for today on her clipboard. They fear that they will experience the same thing. And Max watched the street where their metamorphosis had started from the window of the center. "Perhaps we were mistaken," he muttered. "Perhaps we were fortunate in this case." Derek, however, would not accept that. Too much progress had been made by the seasoned organizer to allow one setback to ruin everything. "No, what transpired there demonstrates the effectiveness of our strategy." Without knowing the procedure, they attempted to replicate the outcome. Dr. Bennett gave a nod of approval. They missed the foundation, but they witnessed the change. The development of trust. The little actions. The interpersonal relationships that enabled it. Their stronghold, where candid talks could take place, was still Laura's diner. She sealed the door to the press as the core group convened for an urgent meeting. She joined them at the central table and remarked, "I never told you why I bought this diner. My brother served in the military. Like so many others, I came home a different person. He was unable to locate himself. Found themselves homeless. It was already too late when I opened this place in the hopes of giving him a purpose." Her tale lingered, serving as a reminder of the significance of their labor. Failure's personal price. The significance of doing it correctly. With his tactical mind working on the issue, Mac finally stated, "We need to learn from this. Recognize what went wrong in order to prevent it from happening again." Bradley brought the Rainier Valley official police report. The details weren't as good as the news had said. Retaliatory violence had been triggered by the unsuccessful intervention, endangering months of gains. What took us months to complete, they attempted to execute in weeks. Coyote watched, looking over the report. Didn't cultivate connections. Didn't get the dynamics of the street. They just declared that they were going to make a change and anticipated that everyone would comply. Messages from other cities interested in the initiative were continuously buzzing on Mac's phone. Despite the fact that the incident had garnered national attention, several people were raising more serious concerns than merely canceling. In what ways had the initial initiative been successful? What crucial components had they overlooked? Dr. Bennett said, "Perhaps that's what we should do next. Teaching the approach is just as important as providing the program." The psychology of change. The significance of timing. The function of fostering community. With sorrowful hearts and resolute minds, the day went on. Veterans organizations came from all across the city to offer their support. Former gang members come to renew their commitment after using their program to find new lives. "We show them," Mac said to the assembled audience. "The hardship as well as the success. The actual labor that enables transformation. In order to foster healing and recommitment, Laura made her diner open to everyone. Images of veterans and ex-gang members entering together, unified in purpose despite the setback, were captured by the media outside. Coyote remarked, seeing the interactions of the diverse group, this is what they don't see. The connections, the trust, the genuine transformations that take place one individual at a time. Mac and Maria drafted additional criteria as evening drew near. The program couldn't be hurried or forced upon us from without. It had to develop from inside each group, based on mutual respect and understanding. We record everything, he demanded. Both the failures and the achievements. Make them aware of the true costs of hastening change and the significance of doing it correctly. Testimonials from people who had discovered new lives through the program were collected by Dr. Bennett. Their tales, which highlight the human side of change, would be incorporated into the training. She reminded everyone that the conflicts we fight with ourselves are the most difficult. Change encompasses more than just new initiatives or regulations. It's about having faith in the potential. On a day that had started with sadness but was coming to a close with newfound purpose, the sun set. As the media vehicle gradually drove away, the somber reality of people banding together, learning, and recommitting to genuine change eclipsed their dramatic tale of failure. Mac saw the neighborhood that had begun it all shift as he stood at the doorway of the diner. The truth that they had learned could not be undone by one setback. That change could be made, but it couldn't be hurried or coerced. Trust, understanding, and an unrelenting commitment to change had to be the cornerstones around which it was constructed. Mac spoke to members from 5 separate neighborhoods in front of a crowded community center 2 weeks after the Rainier Valley tragedy. A mix of city officials, community leaders, veterans, and ex-gang members occupied the folding chairs. This time, there were only people eager to learn about the actual process of transformation, no cameras or media circus. Change isn't a program, Mac said, his voice laden with experience and insight. It's a procedure. Our purpose is not to provide you with a blueprint. Our goal is to teach you how to lay your own foundation. Their message was exemplified by the community center itself. Although the renovation was finished, there were still traces of it. Wall patch marks, varying paint colors, and shoddy restorations. They had purposefully left these marks. Reminders that growth, not perfection, was the goal of transformation. Dr. Bennett spoke first, outlining their novel strategy. She clarified that trauma operates in both directions. Young people are looking for their identity, and veterans are having difficulty finding their purpose. When these requirements are satisfied through fulfilling job, healing takes place. Coyote, who is currently the center's youth outreach coordinator, talked about his personal experience. His tale of transformation struck a profound chord, particularly with the ex-gang members there. The conflict, the uncertainties, the temptations to revert to the past. He didn't hold anything back. This cannot be faked, he informed them. When you genuinely want to change, everyone can tell. This works because of it. Laura had broadened the scope of her diner, setting an example for other companies. She demonstrated how a little eatery might develop into a hub for the neighborhood, a secure setting for challenging dialogue and fresh starts. It's not charity, she said. It's about giving folks the chance to help themselves and get back on their feet. Derek gave tours of their security system, showing how community protection had taken the role of gang intimidation. Former rivals now collaborated. Their streetwise wisdom became a catalyst for progress. Observe the overlap between the patrols, he said. It goes beyond simply keeping an eye on the streets. It's about forming connections, getting to know your community, and feeling like you're a part of something bigger. Mac watched the exchanges throughout the day, noticing how various groups organically discovered points of agreement. Veterans told their stories to young individuals who were looking for guidance. Community leaders attempting to comprehend street dynamics received information from former gang members. In a private moment, he said to Dr. Bennett, "This is what we couldn't explain before. You must observe it taking place and sense the connections developing. As he observed a group therapy session in process, the doctor nodded. Realizing that everyone needed healing, not just veterans or ex-gang members, was the turning point. Trauma is carried by the entire community. The legal framework they had created was delivered by Officer Bradley, who was now formally assigned to community engagement. He clarified, "We're not looking the other way. We are establishing avenues for lawful citizenship and genuine chances for transformation." Maria's ability to stay organized had been essential to recording their procedure. As she showcased their expanding database, she remarked, "Every success, every setback, every lesson learned. A living history of change is being created." Practical applications, identifying community leaders, establishing trust networks, and developing sustainable initiatives were the main topics of the afternoon seminars. The specificity and richness of the inquiries demonstrated that people had taken the Rainier Valley tragedy seriously. "What about resistance?" inquired a Beacon Hill neighborhood leader. "How do you deal with those who are resistant to change?" Coyote came forward to respond. "You let them make the decision after demonstrating that something better is feasible. Change must originate internally." The evening dinner was held in Laura's diner, illustrating how casual settings could promote more meaningful friendships. Conversations around her tables demonstrated how the teachings of the day were being absorbed. James told Dr. Bennett to look at their faces. "They're beginning to get it." The physician grinned. They can now see the human factor that makes it work, as well as the entire picture, not just the outcomes. The different groups got ready to head back to their neighborhoods as night fell. However, they were departing with more than simply good intentions and hope than before. They brought comprehension, useful information, and, above all, reasonable expectations. In his closing remarks, James reminded everyone to remember. The goal here is not to build ideal communities. It's about creating better ones, one individual at a time. The buzz of the day persisted even as the community center slowly dwindled. The ideas they had spent the day preaching were demonstrated by the casual cooperation of veterans and ex-gang members who stayed to clean up. Coyote noticed, stacking chairs, that this time it feels different. They have a long-term perspective and are posing pertinent issues. As he saw the final groups leave, James nodded. They were compelled to examine their own presumptions and the factors that contributed to their success after the Rainier Valley failure. He acknowledged that we needed that wake-up call. Reminded us that this goes beyond policies and initiatives. People are the focus. After locking up her diner, Laura joined them for a day-end review. The three of them, a company owner, a veteran, and a former gang member, represented the varied coalition that enabled their work. She claimed they will still make blunders. Everyone does. However, they now see the importance of the foundation. The neighborhood they had changed was enveloped in darkness. You can see stars in the clear sky over Seattle. Instead of undermining their work, the setback forced them to communicate the more profound realities of community transformation. James gazed out at the quiet neighborhoods from the doorway of the community center. The shift they had initiated was spreading, but this time it was gaining more solid foundations, found in knowledge rather than merely hope. The new sign above the community center glinted in the morning sun. Restoration Project for Veterans and the Community. A constant stream of individuals came in below it. Former gang members seeking reform, veterans seeking meaning, and community members providing assistance. However, today was different. As James approached, he saw it. Their gestures exuded confidence and a sense of belonging instead of desperation. James went over the most recent reports in his office, which had been converted from a storage closet to a small command center. In the last month, 28 veterans were taken off the streets. 15 ex-gang members are now working at respectable jobs. The neighborhood has seen a 60% decrease in crime. Dr. Bennett came in carrying a huge folder and said, "You must see this. Our trauma recovery program is of interest to VA headquarters." They wished to make it a national policy. Coyote, however, interrupted James before he could reply, his expression tensed with worry. We received word from our Tacoma contacts. 3 powerful gangs are banding together. They are accusing us of endangering their way of life. It wasn't a surprise threat. Because of their success, the criminal ecosystem outside of Seattle was upended, and the power structures that profited from social dysfunction were put to the test. As word of their program spread, other communities began to make comparable attempts. Laura showed up with her own update and coffee. The training program now includes 2 additional companies. And you ought to view this. A letter from a large restaurant chain proposing to support similar diner-based community activities around the state was presented to James. James watched the morning activities below from his window. In the parking lot, veterans taught exercise classes, their military discipline now being used for something else. Kids in the neighborhood learned computer skills from former gang members. They turned their street smarts into mentoring. I still find it hard to believe sometimes, he said softly. Continue to anticipate waking up with nothing left. Dr. Bennett gave his arm a little pat. The PTSD is speaking there. The worry that everything positive will vanish. But take a look at what you've created here. What we have collectively constructed. Their core team convened for a planning session in the morning. Maria gave statistics on community involvement, and Derek reported on the growing veteran outreach program. Officer Bradley provided police cooperation updates, emphasizing the evolving dynamic between law enforcement and ex-gang members. They're picking up knowledge from us, Bradley remarked. Our strategy of constructing bridges rather than walls is being emulated by other areas. However, their accomplishment was clouded by the Tacoma news. The gangs there viewed their program as a challenge to the power structure they had upheld for decades, an existential threat. Coyote cautioned that they would approach us in a different way. Not like the crew on the north side. These guys are patient and well organized. They will try to break us from the inside out by identifying our weaknesses. James took in the information, immediately assessing possible reactions in his tactical mind. Then we surprised them by demonstrating strength through unity rather than force. The day went by in a combination of preparation and habit. In order to assist veterans and ex-gang members in processing their common trauma, Dr. Bennett led group therapy sessions. Through a career fair held by Laura's Diner, program graduates were able to find respectable work possibilities. James was watching the employment fair when a young man came up to him. A former member of the Red Wolves is currently working as a security consultant. Do you recall the time you discovered me behind the diner? He inquired. Are you prepared to take on the world? I never imagined that I would be here assisting others in changing. Even though these success stories were more frequent, their influence remained constant. Each one symbolized a life changed and a violent cycle broken. Coyote assembled his outreach group, which consisted of ex-gang members who had received training in community involvement and conflict resolution. He said, "We have eyes on the streets. We'll be informed of any moves from Tacoma." James, however, recognized more in Coyote's leadership. It's true wisdom, not just street smarts. By overcoming his history, the young guy had developed into a person who could help others change. Do you ever miss it? In a quiet time, James questioned him. The strength that comes from fear? Coyote gave a considerate answer. Occasionally. Then I recall that there was no true respect. This is true. Gaining confidence. Assisting others. Creating a lasting structure. Another triumph came in the late afternoon. After years of living beneath the highway, a veteran at last agreed to assistance. Attracted to a volunteer's blazer with his previous unit patch on it. The strength of understanding without bias and of common experience kept proving itself. As the sun started to set, Laura observed from her diner. Outside, the street is quiet but not deserted. Community patrols made deliberate movements. Residents used their names to greet one another. Youngsters played fearlessly. She commented, they said it wouldn't last, as James joined her for coffee in the evening. That we were merely shifting the issues to another location. James gave a nod, acknowledging the criticism they had received. We didn't ignore issues. We confronted them. Handled them. Presented individuals in a different manner. However, Tacoma posed a threat. They had learned from experience that fresh obstacles were frequently presented by success. This change necessitated ongoing attention to detail and flexibility. During the evening staff meeting, Dr. Bennett reminded them that we are stronger now. Not only in figures, but also in comprehension. What works and what doesn't is known to us. How to preserve what we have created. Evening activities filled the community center. Courses in education. Support communities. Training in skills. The sound of laborers collaborating. Studying. Expanding. Establishing something greater than themselves. The deeper reality of their effort became apparent during James's last walkthrough of the evening. In each and every room. Every conversation. He recognized the value of connection. Veterans discover meaning in serving others. Former adversaries cooperating. People in the community are making investments in their common future. Tacoma posed a real threat. However, so was the power they had developed. Not terror or the power of guns. But of a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, and a steadfast dedication to change. Slowly, the first indications of disaster emerged. Little things at beginning. Unknown cars driving around the area. Suspicious purchases made at nearby retailers. Whispered discussions that came to an end when neighbors showed there. The Tacoma gangs were much more dangerous than earlier threats because of their patience and accuracy. James was standing in the observation room of the community center, examining the security feed network. Their defense capabilities had changed after 3 months of preparation. Monitoring stations were manned by veterans. Now, the community they had helped create was the main focus of their military training. Derek pointed to a monitor and said, "There are 4 new faces on Palmer Street. They are mapping patrol routes in search of any openings." When she came, Dr. Bennett had some alarming news from her morning sessions. The level of anxiety is increasing. People sense an impending event. Recruitment attempts have been reported by 2 of our recent grads. As further reports came in, lengthy shadows were cast through the center's windows by the morning sun. The picture created by Coyote Street Connections was unsettling. It was true that 3 powerful Tacoma gangs had banded together, combining forces and resources for the first time in many years. During the emergency briefing, Coyote clarified that they are referring to themselves as the Coalition. Had runners moving in weapons and erecting safe shelters. Territory is no longer the only factor at play here. They want to ensure that what we have created cannot spread by destroying it. They had made Laura's Diner their forward operations base. Its innocent appearance makes it the ideal cover for acquiring intelligence. Officers in plain clothes and seasoned onlookers observing the constant influx of new faces into the neighborhood were now regular clients. Sharing police knowledge, Officer Bradley cautioned that they were not like the others. More patient and well-organized. Before they act, they are researching us and figuring out our habits. Mac walked around the community center, making sure everything was ready, which had been planned for months. Multiple evacuation routes, strengthened walls, secure communication systems, and concealed security elements were all part of the remodeling. However, their people were their true strength. He reminded the assembled defenders to keep in mind their training. We are more than just building guards. Hope is what we're defending. The notion that things can change. In the community, Dr. Bennett had set up a system of safe houses. Locations where people of the community who were at risk could seek safety in the event of violence. In the hopes that they wouldn't be called upon, her trauma response teams were prepared. She clarified during the afternoon briefing that the psychological pressure is a component of their plan. They want us to begin doubting ourselves and to break from the inside out. With practiced composure, Laura worked her diner, but her eyes never missed anything. She had taught her employees to identify dangers, updated her emergency procedures, and installed new security cameras. Veterans were among the casual breakfast attendees, seated in strategic locations for best coverage. She informed Mac that they had returned this morning. 3 of them are observing everything while attempting to appear casual while inquiring about the show and you. Coyote assembled his ex-gang members, both men and women, who had discovered a new calling in volunteer work. They were now able to recognize possible dangers before they became real because to their essential street experience. I received word from my Tacoma contact, who told Mac in private. They have big plans, want to set an example for us, and want to demonstrate to other neighborhoods what happens when you try to make changes. The community's reaction to the escalating danger demonstrated their progress. There was organization, not panic. There was determination, not fear. Residents kept the solidarity they had worked so hard to create, watched out for one another, and reported suspicious activities. Derek updated, noting places on their tactical map, and we have our sights set on 12 possible adversaries. Despite their professionalism, slow approach, and creation of cover identities, our people are always able to identify them. From the roof of the center, Mac observed the neighborhood, observing the faint indications of preparation. Together, veterans and ex-gang members patrolled, moving casually yet deliberately. People in the community continued to be mindful while going about their daily lives. In a quiet moment, he told Dr. Bennett, they don't know what they're really fighting. They believe that this is about power and territory, but it's really about change. Violence isn't the answer to that. The doctor nodded, realizing the more profound reality. The individuals they are targeting have changed. These are no longer lost youngsters or damaged veterans. They are builders, mentors, and leaders in the community. The anxiety increased as dusk drew near. Increased activity in the coalition's safe shelters was reported by Coyote sources. They could all sense the pressure that was rising. Officer Bradley looked over the pattern of reports and noted that they were waiting for something. A trigger or indication of some sort. Before it's too late, we must determine what. There were more veterans in Laura's evening gathering than normal, and they were arranged thoughtfully across the dining area. Although every entry was covered and every aspect was monitored, the untrained eye would not notice anything out of the ordinary. Do you recall when this was just a coffee shop? With a note of nostalgia in her voice, she queried Mac. Now watch us, over coffee and pie, strategizing defenses. As night settled over Seattle, the night shift took their stations. Quiet activity filled the community center as communications teams kept an eye on frequencies, veterans kept watch, and ex-gang members shared information they had learned from their contacts on the streets. Around midnight, Derek reported seeing several cars coming in from the south. They were traveling different routes and attempting to appear unrelated, but they were undoubtedly organized. Mac examined the tactical display, identifying the pattern thanks to his military experience. The coalition was carrying out a meticulously prepared operation that had been planned for months, but they were up against an unknown force. A society brought together by true transformation rather than coercion or terror. With the quiet authority that has guided soldiers in battle, he commanded, alert all teams, but maintain normal patterns. Give them the impression that we don't anticipate them. Even as the night became darker and the threat of conflict grew heavier, residents in the neighborhood remained unwavering. Reformed gang members remained vigilant, veterans double-checked their locations, and neighbors were prepared to help one another. Here, they had created something significant, not merely a movement or a program, but a real change in people's lives. The Alliance was going to discover that unity, purpose, and an unyielding dedication to a better way were the actual sources of strength and that some changes could not be undone by force. Just before dawn, the coalition launched a well-planned onslaught with the goal of overwhelming and discouraging. From all sides, dozens of armed men gathered at the community center as they poured out of unmarked cars. With their weapons ready and their movements executed with military precision, they were poised for a quick and definitive win. However, when they broke through the barrier, they saw something completely different, a community that was prepared and eager to defend what they had created. Max was standing in the middle of the command room, staring at the tactical monitors. "Initiate outer defenses," he said in a steady, calm voice. "Cut them off after drawing them in." Teams that had been positioned beforehand jumped into action throughout the neighborhood. After months of training and preparation, veterans and ex-gang members worked side by side, coordinating their moves. They let the assailants go forward, enticing them to penetrate more into the community's fortifications. Officer Bradley made sure the reaction would be prompt and focused by coordinating with police departments throughout the city. He told his officers that containment, not escalation, is our objective. We want this to stop without any more bloodshed. The late-night patrons of Laura's diner stayed quiet. They have unflinching faith in the community's defenders. Even as tension grew outside, Laura herself moved between tables, providing consolation and assurance. The medical wing of the community center was manned by Dr. Bennett and her staff, ready to handle any casualties. However, as news from the front lines started to come in, a new picture started to take shape. Anticipating a disorganized and terrified opposition, the coalition's fighters were confronted by a disciplined and well-coordinated defense. Every building was fortified, every street was fought. The community's readiness and determination were far greater than the invaders' superior numbers. Through the darkness, Coyote Street squads disrupted the coalition's supply and communication routes. They attacked important commanders, causing chaos and uncertainty within the ranks of the assailants. The tide started to turn as the troubled neighborhood saw the arrival of daybreak. As they ran across opposition at every turn, the coalition's early push stalled and their losses increased. Now that James had succeeded in luring them in, the assailants were surrounded and cut off. As the enemy's positions deteriorated on the tactical screens, James gave the order to give them an opportunity to surrender. "More bloodshed than is necessary is not what we want." Through loudspeakers, Officer Bradley announced the offer, guaranteeing all who put down their weapons equitable treatment. Many were shocked when some of the coalition's fighters started to acquiesce, their determination eroding in the face of the community's uncompromising stance. The coalition's offensive turned into a string of separate battles as the morning went on, leaving its men dispersed and disheartened. Pressing their advantage, the community's defenders retook building after building and street after street. With its tables covered in maps and real-time updates from the front lines, Laura's diner was transformed into a temporary command post. In order to put a definitive end to the menace, James and his group planned the last effort. It ended in the middle of the morning. The neighborhood was left damaged but intact after the coalition's remaining fighters fled or surrendered. The streets were silent, but not out of fear, but out of relief and resolution. A more profound reality started to surface as the community started to evaluate the harm and care for the injured. The coalition had arrived with the intention of defeating a weak and dispersed adversary. Rather, they had come across something much more potent. A changed community bound together by a common dedication to a better way of life rather than fear. Standing amid the rubble, James watched the sights of a community that had shown itself resilient in the face of its biggest danger. Veterans, ex-gang members, and regular citizens labored with him, caring for the wounded, removing debris, and starting the reconstruction process. He spoke to Dr. Bennett, who was tending to a wounded defense. "This is what we fought for. Protecting the change we've brought about is just as important as defending territory." The doctor nodded, a mixture of pride and tiredness visible in her eyes. "They didn't realize what we've accomplished here. They believed they were up against a gang, but in reality, they were up against an ideology. Ideas are also impervious to criticism. Stories of bravery, selflessness, and solidarity in the face of insurmountable difficulties started to surface as the day went on. The community had undergone unprecedented testing, but it had come out stronger and more dedicated to the transformational journey. The actual effects of the coalition's defeat would become evident in the days and weeks that followed. Far beyond Seattle, the community's stand had conveyed a message that even the most ingrained patterns of violence and hopelessness could be broken, that change was possible, and that unity could win out over division. But for the moment, as the sun sank over a neighborhood that would never be the same, the fact that they had survived was all that mattered. They had overcome their biggest obstacle and come out stronger than ever, determined to live a better life. The fight was done, but the transition process was just getting started. As he observed the town rebuilding, Mac realized that the true triumph was not the defeat of an adversary but rather the establishment of something much more potent, a community bound together by purpose, optimism, and an unshakable faith in the potential for change. The area adapted to a new normal in the weeks after the coalition's collapse. The wounded recovered, the bodily harm was fixed, and daily routines returned. However, a fundamental change had occurred beneath the surface. The community had been put to the test, and it had come out stronger, closer to one another, and more dedicated to the transformational journey. As the community center hummed with revitalized activity, Mac observed with silent pride. As they collaborated to protect the area, veterans and ex-gang members developed relationships that went beyond their differences. The center was no longer only a place for support and healing. It now represented the community's tenacity and will. Dr. Bennett's trauma teams put in extra hours to assist residents in dealing with the psychological effects of the assault. However, a fresh sense of empowerment and purpose started to surface even as they faced with the aftereffects of violence and fear. Those who had previously viewed themselves as victims now regarded themselves as survivors and change agents in both their own and others' lives. During a morning briefing, Laura said, "We've seen a surge in volunteers. Being a part of something greater than oneself is what people desire. Their goal is to change things." With a fresh perspective on the community he served thanks to his personal experiences in the conflict, Officer Bradley nodded. People's perceptions of law enforcement are also changing. They are beginning to view us as allies instead than enemies. Coyote assumed a new role as a mentor to the young people in the area, using his leadership abilities that he had developed over months of training and experience. By planning outreach initiatives and workshops, he demonstrated to young people that there were other options outside the gang life he had experienced. He said to Mac in a low voice, "They're hungry for something more. They have witnessed the strength of purpose and unity. They wish to participate in that." Word of the community's turnaround extended outside of Seattle as it continued to recover and develop. Other cities and neighborhoods started to pay attention. In order to understand how the community had accomplished what so many others had said was impossible, delegations came to learn from their experiences. Mac was thrust into a new position as a mentor and educator. He talked about the things they had learned, the tactics they had used, and the difficulties they had surmounted. However, he consistently underlined the most crucial fact: transformation was about people, not about policies or programs, and it was about the strength of human connection, a common goal, and the unflinching faith that change was possible. He told a group of national community leaders, "We didn't set out to create a model. Our goal was to establish a family, a place where everyone was accepted and could contribute to the creation of something better." The difficulties the town faced increased along with its reputation. The neighborhood's change was perceived by rival gangs and criminal organizations as a danger to their way of life. By looking for flaws and trying to take advantage of any gaps in the foundation they had established, they put the community's determination to the test. But they approached every obstacle with the same unyielding resolve that got them through their lowest point. The defenders of the village maintained their vigilance, their coordination and abilities refined by ongoing preparation and training. Despite the outside threats, the neighborhood's people stayed united in their commitment to a better way of life. The community center, the pulsating heart of the change they had brought about, was at the center of it all. Here, ex-gang members sought atonement and a fresh start, and veterans found solace and meaning. Families found services and help here, while young people in the community found mentors and role models. The concept of transformation had begun to take root here and has since expanded and spread. The neighborhood's change started to have repercussions well beyond its boundaries as the months went by. Other communities started their own transformational journeys after being inspired by their example. Former enemies started to put down their weapons and look for common ground after realizing the strength of unity and a common goal. Once seemingly unbreakable, the cycle of violence and misery started to show symptoms of waning and giving birth to something fresh and promising. And throughout it all, James and his group continued to lead and support the transformation they had contributed to. They were aware that the process of change was never fully complete and that there would always be fresh difficulties to conquer. However, they were also aware that what they had produced was considerably more powerful than any one program or project. They had established a community that shared the conviction that a better way of life was achievable and that change was feasible. James stood atop the community center, overlooking the neighborhoods that had come to represent resiliency and optimism, as the sun sank over the neighborhood. The shrines to those who had lost their lives defending their neighborhood and the gunshot holes that pocked several of the walls were reminders of the past. Beyond those wounds, however, a new future was emerging. A future of recovery, development, and the limitless potential that results from people banding together to pursue a shared goal. And James realized that this was just the beginning as the last glimmer of light disappeared from the sky. That the change they had started here would keep spreading, affecting people's lives and communities in ways they could not have predicted. That despite how bleak the road may appear, the strength of human connection, a common goal, and steadfast faith would always illuminate the route ahead. Although the fight was over, the process of change was just getting started. They would get closer to a future where hope would triumph over despair, where unity would triumph over division, and where the power of transformation would reside in every heart, just waiting to be awakened, with every step, obstacle surmounted, and relationship formed. James was thinking back on the long journey they had taken as the community's transformation began its second year. The road had been one of continuous learning, adaptation, and development, from the early days of hardship and uncertainty to the hard-won wins in the always-growing network of change. The growth of the veteran-led training programs has been one of the most important changes. What started out as a means of assisting ex-service members in discovering meaning in community has grown into an all-encompassing system of community building, skill development, and mentoring. Now, veterans traveled from all over the nation to the neighborhood to learn from James and his crew and acquire the skills and information necessary to spearhead changes in their own areas. James informed a group of new immigrants that it's not simply about restoring lives. The goal is to create a movement and a network of leaders who can continue this effort and serve as role models for others. Additionally, Dr. Bennett's trauma-informed approach had drawn national notice. Both legislators and medical professionals were interested in her team because of their accomplishments in assisting people and communities in recovering from the scars of addiction and violence. In order to share their techniques and ideas with an expanding network of professionals committed to ending the cycle of trauma, the community center began holding frequent conferences and seminars. Coyote and his group persisted in innovating on the streets, creating fresh strategies to connect with vulnerable youth and offer them alternatives to the life of a gang member. In order to give young people the skills they required to develop their own enterprises and create sustainable livelihoods, they started a number of entrepreneurship initiatives. Additionally, they collaborated with nearby educational institutions and civic associations, establishing a network of assistance and prospects that went well beyond the boundaries of the area. At a meeting with local authorities, Coyote stated, "We're not just changing lives. Our systems are evolving. We're demonstrating that there is an alternative approach to fostering opportunity, hope, and communities." The difficulties the community faced increased along with its influence. In an attempt to duplicate their achievements, other cities frequently found it difficult to modify the model to fit their own particular situation. James and his group discovered that they were traveling more and more to advise and assist nascent transformation initiatives around the nation. James advised a struggling Chicago neighborhood leader that change is never easy. It requires tolerance, time, and an openness to change. However, it also requires a conviction in the potential and a dedication to the notion that things may be different. Back in Seattle, Laura's Diner had developed into a center of community activity where locals and tourists could congregate to socialize, exchange ideas, and form bonds. In keeping with the increasing variety of the neighborhood and the city at large, she had broadened the menu to include cuisine from all over the world. She told a local paper reporter that food had the power to unite people. It is a universal language that can be used to overcome differences and establish points of agreement. The group started to struggle with new issues of identity and purpose as it flourished. Some started to question what the next chapter in their life would be when the threat of gang violence subsided and the support and opportunity networks were well established. How might they develop farther, to push the limits of what was conceivable? According to James, the answer was inherent in the change they had initiated. He informed a group of local leaders that change is a process rather than a final goal. We don't accomplish it once and then forget about it. Every day, we reaffirm our commitment to it in every deed and conversation. In keeping with that, the community center started a new project, a think tank that brings together professionals from a variety of disciplines, including neuroscience, urban planning, and conflict resolution, with the goal of investigating the boundaries of social change. The project aimed to increase knowledge about how change occurs and how it may be fostered and maintained throughout time. At the first meeting of the think tank, Dr. Bennett stated, "We've learned so much about what it takes to transform a community. However, we still have a lot to learn and a lot of unexplored ground to cover. This is our opportunity to push the envelope of what is feasible, to generate fresh insights and innovative change management techniques." The think tank's innovations and insights went much beyond Seattle as its efforts started to pay off. The neighborhood's change served as a wake-up call for communities all across the world, showing them what was achievable in their own setting. In order to learn how to create new alliances and cooperation in the worldwide struggle against violence, poverty, and despair, delegations traveled from far and wide, including South Africa, Brazil, and India. And the core of the change was constant throughout it all. The steadfast conviction that all people, regardless of their circumstances or background, have a part to play in creating a better society and that human connection is powerful. Mac noticed more than just the obvious physical changes in the neighborhood he had spent so much time in: new structures, flourishing companies, green areas where there had formerly been nothing but concrete and hopelessness. He noticed something more profound and deep. A community that was changed in its core as well as its outside conditions. He witnessed a place where the once impossible dream of a better way of life had become a living, breathing reality, where togetherness had triumphed over division, and where hope had overcome pessimism. And he was aware that this was just the start of the transformational trip, which would continue to spread in ever-widening circles until it reached every part of the globe. The real test of success, for Mac, Dr. Bennett, Laura, Coyote, and everyone else who put their all into this work, was not the recognition or the attention they received, but rather the lives they impacted, the hearts they roused, and the sparks of change they ignited. They were aware that their work would continue and that the process of change would continue until every community, every life, and every heart were illuminated from within by the unquenchable fire of possibility and hope as the sun rose over the city and illuminated the streets and alleys where only darkness had previously prevailed. 2 more amazing tales await you directly on your screen in the next section. You won't want to miss these if you like this one. Simply click to view, and remember to subscribe. A lot would be at stake.
Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.